They say the Hollow Creek Plantation burned for 3 days, but the screams went on for 4. When the smoke cleared, the family Bible was the only thing left standing in the ash. It was open to the book of Genesis, and beneath the word creation, someone had scrawled, in blood, "We made our own." For 170 years, no one dared speak of what happened inside the Lamenton estate, a sprawling, decaying plantation on the outskirts of Griffin County, Georgia. But recently, while restoring the land, workers unearthed something beneath the collapsed cellar: a wooden crib, 3 tiny jawbones, and a name carved into the floorboards: the Master's Daughters. This is the forgotten history of a dynasty born from horror, a story erased from every ledger, silenced by every church, and buried by time itself. Tonight, we open that grave. Welcome to the Hollow Creek breeding experiment. In the spring of 1852, Ephraim Lamenton, a wealthy plantation owner, inherited 400 acres of tobacco and 112 enslaved men and women. To outsiders, he was a man of God, known for hosting Sunday sermons in his marble parlor. But within the house, he ruled by scripture twisted to madness. Ephraim had 3 daughters: Abigail, Mary Ellen, and Clara, each raised under strict purity laws. They were forbidden mirrors, music, or laughter after sunset. Their father preached that a woman's body was the Lord's vessel, to be filled only by divine command. When his wife, Eliza, died in childbirth, Ephraim claimed to have heard the Lord's voice, instructing him to build a new generation, one untainted by sin. He believed the blood of the enslaved carried the strength of Eden, and that his daughters' wombs could birth something pure, something eternal. The preacher refused to baptize them. The church expelled him. So Ephraim built his own altar in the basement. It was said that on moonless nights, the daughters' screams echoed across the valley, and the slaves were forbidden to look toward the house. One man, however, was chosen. His name was Jonah, the plantation's strongest slave. The master called him the Seed. Jonah had been brought from Virginia, a man of immense strength and quiet obedience. He'd once lifted a plow cart with his bare hands. But those who worked beside him whispered that Jonah's silence wasn't fear, it was fury sealed shut. When Ephraim chose him, it wasn't by consent. Jonah was chained in the cellar beneath the chapel. For 40 nights, Ephraim forced him to kneel before a pulpit carved from oak and bone, reading scripture as if conducting a sermon. But the verses he read weren't from the Bible. They were his own writings, words about binding flesh to spirit and making man anew. The daughters were brought down one by one, their faces veiled, trembling as their father recited blessings that turned into commands. What happened in that room broke something in Jonah. After the first night, his eyes turned hollow, yet his body obeyed. Ephraim would say, "The Lord works through the strong." But the others saw something else: the way the animals fled when Jonah passed, how lamps flickered near him. And then came the births. One by one, the daughters bore children, pale, silent, with strange gray eyes that never blinked. The midwives swore the infants didn't cry, only stared. Ephraim called them the beginning. By 1854, there were 3 infants in Hollow Creek, one from each daughter. They were called Isaac, Miriam, and Ruth. The plantation whispered that none of them were fully human. Their skin was pale, but marked with dark veins like roots beneath the surface. They grew too quickly, speaking before they were 1, walking before they turned 2. The enslaved mothers avoided them, claiming their shadows moved before they did. Ephraim saw this as divine confirmation. He built a private chapel and inscribed above its door, "Flesh of my faith, born of my design." Every Sunday, he paraded the children before his congregation, a cult of family and a few loyal servants. They sang hymns no one had heard before, hymns Ephraim said were revealed through the bloodline. By the time the Civil War began, Hollow Creek was no longer a plantation. It was a sanctuary for the chosen flesh. Then, something began to rot inside the house. Jonah refused food and began carving symbols into the walls of his cell, shapes resembling spirals and eyes. Abigail's baby stopped breathing one night, yet its body did not decay. For weeks, Ephraim kept it in a cradle near the altar, insisting it still listened. The daughters begged him to stop. He replied, "We've only just begun God's experiment." On a storming night in 1861, thunder shook the valley. A servant named Ruth claimed to see Ephraim descend into the cellar carrying a torch, his eyes burning brighter than the flame. Moments later, the entire house trembled. Screams erupted from below, not human screams, but something deeper. When the storm cleared, the estate was burning. Witnesses said the flames were green. Jonah was seen breaking his chains and dragging Ephraim's body into the fire. By dawn, only the 3 daughters survived, covered in soot, holding their children. The rest of the house was ash. The official record said lightning struck the roof. But the county coroner refused to touch Ephraim's remains. His jaw was locked open, as if he'd died mid-scream, yet no sound came from him. The daughters buried their father by the creek and swore never to speak his name again. But the land would not stay quiet. Neighbors claimed to hear babies crying from the burned foundation at night. And when the ashes cooled, there was one thing still intact. Jonah's cell. Carved into its walls were the words, 3 born of the cross. 1 shall return to finish it. After the fire, Abigail, Mary Ellen, and Clara sealed the ruins of Hollow Creek beneath boards and scripture. Each retreated into silence. Abigail, eldest, became the keeper of her father's Bible, though half its pages were charred. Mary Ellen wandered the fields at night, humming lullabies to the ashes. Clara, the youngest, vanished for a month, returning with her child's eyes black as tar. The county minister tried to bless the property, but the horses refused to cross the gate. Locals said the sisters were half-dead wives of a dead god. Within a year, their children stopped aging. The girls dressed them in new clothes each spring, yet their faces never changed. The town doctor, summoned in fear, wrote only 1 line in his ledger before burning it. Their pulses are wrong. In 1863, soldiers passed through and reported a house of dolls guarded by women who spoke in unison. None returned the same. By 1865, the Lamenton name disappeared from county rolls until a new document emerged. Hollow Creek Orphanage for the Unwanted, 1866, founded by Miss Clara Lamenton. Clara turned the ashes into sanctuary. To outsiders, it was charity. To those inside, it was ritual. The orphanage accepted children abandoned after the war, mixed-blood infants, mute boys, blind girls. Yet witnesses claimed the orphans were chosen for something else. Each dawn began with prayer before a black-painted cross carved from the ruins. Children were told they were descendants of the first blood. That pain was proof of grace. Every month, 1 child vanished. Clara said they'd been adopted by heaven. Surviving records show inked drawings of circles filled with eyes, signed M.L., Mary Ellen Lamenton. She and Abigail joined their sister, serving as matrons of rebirth. The townsfolk grew afraid. They heard chanting in the swamp at night, saw lights drifting through mist like lanterns underwater. In 1871, a midwife named Ruthin, the same who saw the fire, reported the sisters bathing in blood-colored water. Her letter ended mid-sentence. When a sheriff arrived, he found only silent children standing in rows, mouths stitched with red thread. Hidden beneath the chapel floorboards was a ledger labeled The Doctrine of Flesh. It wasn't scripture, it was experiment. Detailed notes described blood transfusions between orphans, mixtures of soil and ash used in baptism, and prayers rewritten as anatomical formulas. Ephraim's handwriting appeared again, somehow fresher than the charred ink of 1852. Beside it, the seed continues. Each page ended with the same symbol Jonah carved, a spiral within an eye. Scholars later discovered the pattern resembled an African protection sigil twisted backwards, turning a ward into a summons. Clara had inverted Jonah's curse, calling whatever he tried to banish. By the 1880s, visitors reported that no one inside Hollow Creek seemed to age. Orphans who'd arrived as infants now appeared frozen at 12. In photographs taken by a traveling missionary, the figures blur as if moving between frames. Only 1 child looks clear, gray-eyed, faint smile. The missionary, Father Edwin Price, returned to Atlanta claiming he'd found a house where time breaks. He presented a jar of river mud that hissed when uncorked. Authorities dismissed him as delusional, yet 3 days later his tongue blackened, and he died uttering 1 word repeatedly, Jonah. When investigators reached the orphanage, they found it deserted. Beds still warm, meals half-eaten, candles still burning. On each pillow lay a tooth. The basement door was open. Beneath, a tunnel stretched toward the old plantation graveyard. The walls pulsed faintly, as if alive. At the end stood a cradle made of roots. Inside, a figure breathed though its skin was stone. They sealed the place and burned it again. But the next morning, the building stood intact, untouched by flame. In 1899, railroad workers clearing land nearby uncovered a metal box. Inside were glass slides labeled Experiments AC. Each showed blood cells dividing endlessly, forming symbols instead of patterns: crosses, spirals, eyes. Medical journals ignored it. Yet in 1903, a hospital in Macon reported 3 patients with identical birthmarks, a spiral inside the eye socket. Their ancestry traced to Griffin County. Rumors revived the name Lamenton. Locals whispered of a traveling preacher promising purity through recombination. He sold vials of sanctified blood, said to cure disease. He called himself Father Isaac. Father Isaac's sermons drew hundreds. He preached that God's image must be grown, not worshipped. Congregants drank his red tonic. Some healed miraculously, others screamed for hours, their veins darkening like roots. Within months, an entire sect formed, the Hollow Creek. They built tents in Georgia's pine forests, chanting the doctrine of flesh. The government dismissed it as another backwoods cult until livestock across 3 counties were found drained of blood, their carcasses arranged in spirals. Survivors of the congregation later claimed Isaac's eyes glowed gray, and that at night, they saw a taller shadow standing behind him, its hands enormous, scarred, silent. They called it the Guardian. Archivists found no record of Jonah's death. Plantation ledgers marked him missing after fire. Yet an 1872 coffin exhumed near Hollow Creek contained bones far too large for any man. Chains fused into the ribcage as if metal had melted into flesh. In 1910, a rail worker reported a giant figure watching from the tree line, its eyes like mirrors. Footprints 3 times normal size led toward the orphanage ruins and stopped at the creek. Every 30 years since, the same prints reappear, perfectly preserved in mud, as if time forgets to erase them. Some say Jonah never died, that his silence bound the land itself, waiting for the bloodline to finish what Ephraim began. When influenza ravaged Georgia, Hollow Creek remained untouched. Father Isaac opened his grounds as sanctuary, claiming divine protection. The sick who entered either recovered overnight or vanished. Military medics who inspected the camp found glass tanks beneath the tents, filled with pulsating red fluid and fetal shapes. They ordered the site burned. Witnesses swore the flames turned inward, consumed themselves, then vanished. All records of Hollow Creek's immunity were sealed under biological anomaly. Decades later, orphans adopted from those camps resurfaced under new names: scientists, preachers, politicians. Each carried uncanny intelligence, emotionless calm, and a small mark behind the ear. 3 faint dots forming a triangle. They founded charities, hospitals, and research institutes, all using one emblem: the eye within a spiral. In 1935, a psychologist studying the group described them as descendants of a self-replicating ideology, bloodline as institution. Funding for his report vanished overnight. He died whispering, "They're still breeding faith." In 1942, Dr. Eleanor Marsh, anthropologist at Emory University, found a surviving journal from Clara Lamenton. It described the orphanage not as home, but as the womb of the world. She wrote that each generation must merge blood until flesh remembers Eden. The final line read, "When the seed awakens, the sky will fold." Days after sending her findings to Washington, Marsh vanished. Her office was found emptied except for one photograph: 3 women in black dresses standing before a river. Behind them, a 4th figure, faceless, enormous, hand on Clara's shoulder. From 1945 onward, Hollow Creek became government property, fenced, unmarked. Locals reported humming from the ground, like a heartbeat. No birds nested nearby. The water ran red for 3 days every spring. Children born within 10 miles often had mismatched eyes, one gray, one brown. Doctors blamed mineral exposure. The elders called it Lamenton's touch. At night, travelers still claimed to hear a man's voice from the trees, low, calm, saying, "The seed sleeps." Exactly a century after the first births, surveyors digging for a new road uncovered the old basement. Untouched, dry, intact. Inside, 3 cribs, each with a perfectly preserved infant skeleton and one adult skull fused to the wall behind them. The skull's mouth was open toward the bones, as if whispering. The state sealed the find and paved over it. But a week later, pavement cracked in spiral patterns. The foreman quit, claiming he saw hands reaching through asphalt like roots through soil. In 1997, a journalist named Evelyn Holt revisited the legend for a local documentary. Her footage, recovered years later, shows her entering the forest, describing whispers in the wind. Abigail, Mary Ellen, Clara. The tape ends with her turning the camera toward the creek. A figure stands there, tall, still, eyes like glass. No one ever found Evelyn. Her last words on tape: "He's still waiting." DNA analyses from Griffin County reveal anomalies. Gene sequences repeating too perfectly, as if edited. Locals with the Lamenton surname are few, yet every decade one is born with silver-gray eyes. Some become pastors, others scientists. All avoid mirrors. A sealed document from 2020, declassified by accident, mentions subject J3, probable hybrid descendant of Hollow Creek experiments. The file ends abruptly with, "Terminate fieldwork." The seed is aware. Today, Hollow Creek is a restricted wetland. Trees grow in perfect spirals. Water never freezes. At night, a low hum rolls through the soil, like breathing. Local children dare each other to dig where the house once stood. Those who do report dreams of 3 women calling from the dark. Father says, "Come home." Some believe the dynasty ended in 1852. Others believe it never ended at all, that every act of control, every institution built on purity and power, carries a trace of Ephraim Lamenton's creed. And if you listen close on a moonless night, when the mist thickens over Georgia's red earth, you might hear a whisper beneath the hum. Creation never stopped. Please subscribe.